And so we're talking price action and Bitcoin nation state adoption with the wise rabbit today, right?
Oh yeah. Let's talk about that. Number
Big
go
deal
up.
that you have been as close to the ECB as anyone I
I've
know.
been sitting in peaceful protest in front of the European Central Bank for 10 days now.
No one I know went this close.
That is so true.
There's no more doubt to raise your voice and make some noise.
Here's the progressive Bitcoiner with Margot, Paez.
Try my best. Yeah.
And now to
That's usually
Patrick,
my wake-up
who's half
call.
asleep. Knock, knock. Okay.
So we're talking price action and Bitcoin nation state adoption with the wise rabbit today, right?
Oh yeah. Let's talk about that. Number
Big
go
deal
up.
that you have been as close to the ECB as anyone I know. No one I know went this close.
That is so true.
You've been there, right?
Neo, you have been at the ECB.
6 weeks now, actually, like 2 years, 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And I think, confrontation protest, being at the place where shit happens is really important. With climate activism, I've been in coal mines and in front of highway buildups, construction sites, in front of parliament, of course. But I believe being at the place where things are going wrong is a very powerful message we can send, and that's why I chose to do a sit-in in front of the central bank, inspired by the sit-in by Greta Thunberg, who sat in front of the Swedish parliament for 3 weeks, and then did the weekly protest on Fridays, which evolved into Fridays for Future.
Yes. Okay. So hold up. Album screech. Let's. We're getting into this, but I want to introduce you first to our listeners because I think a lot of people may not know who you are, and also go through our show intro because I often forget. But this time, Patrick, I remembered. You didn't have to remind me.
Very proud of you.
Thank you so much. So to our listeners, hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm Margot Paez, your host. Patrick over here to either side of me. I don't know how this is going to show up in the end, or maybe just on the next screen. I don't know. But Patrick, he is our amazing producer on the show. And we have a wonderful guest today. His name, he's going by Neo today. But he's well known, I think, if you've been paying attention to this one guy in an orange vest who happens to stand outside in front of the ECB with a sign and doing something very similar to a Fridays for Future. But I think it's called Saturdays for Satoshi. Is that right?
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into that, because this is exciting, we are literally, talking about nation state adoption in a little bit here, because the ECB is the center of the central bank, framework in Europe. It's the equivalent of the Federal Reserve. And in the United States, we're talking about having the strategic reserve and Donald Trump and Orange Coin and all of this stuff. And what we're often missing is that not everybody likes this stuff, likes just being like, yeah, go states. And there are actually people with a different perspective on this. So, I would love to know, first of all, how you got into Bitcoin and how you ended up merging Bitcoin with your activism.
So I studied economics, and I got into huge fights with my professors over how money works and why the GDP is a good measurement of value created in an economy. And parallel to my studies at university with economics, I was at a at a lecture of the Potsdam Institute for Climate catastrophe science, basically. So they brought in researchers from all over the world, mostly from Germany, who were in the Arctics and Antarctics and were telling us what is actually happening to the ecosystems. And leaving this lecture, I was worried sick about the future of our planet. So I thought we needed to take drastic action and actually change the economic system at the basis. And I always knew that economics had something to do with it, but I couldn't quite grasp it at that time. And then I was searching for like personal investments. I got into stocks and ETFs and stuff. And also I put a bit into Bitcoin. And I started reading more about it. And the more I read about it, the more it dawned on me that this thing might actually change how we as a society interact and trade with each other. And yeah, it went on from there.
Was that when you got into fights with your economics professors when you read about Bitcoin? Or was that before already? Okay.
Yeah, I was questioning the framework before, but my questions weren't really good. And then I looked into Austrian economics, and there's no professor at our university, or there was no professor at our university that taught this specific school of thought in economics. So I just had to read it up by myself in the library. I just lent all the books, and I was sitting there, and I had this one eureka moment after the other, and I was like, everybody should read this because this makes so much sense now. But yeah, it was a pretty lonely journey for a while.
When did it stop being a lonely journey?
It still kind of is in a different way.
Yeah.
But it stopped being a lonely journey when I went to the first Bitcoin meetup, because I was in the rabbit hole for almost 2 years by myself. It was just people on the internet talking about this. And I was reading up about it and had my own thoughts and bounced them back and forth with my fellow students and friends at that time, but they all wouldn't quite get it. But I would basically overload them with a lot of information on what was going on in my head. But I kind of pushed them away in a bit because they couldn't follow me really. And I think I wasn't really communicating clearly at that point because I hadn't figured it out myself yet. But I needed someone to talk to try to explain it to, because you only understand something once you can explain it easily. So this was basically my training ground. But I felt increasingly isolated and lonely from my social circle because they wouldn't give me the validation that I sought after in this moment, that these are logical thoughts. And then I went to this Bitcoin meetup in Cologne, and I remember when I went out there and went home, I was actually in tears of joy, because I felt, I'm not the only person that has come up with these ideas. And that was a wonderful feeling to not be that lonely anymore with these thoughts.
Yeah, it's kind of relatable, Patrick. You have Leia, so you're not that lonely, but do you relate at all to that? I do to a certain degree.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was not Bitcoin meetups, but I've just been thinking about this devastation that you described there, Neo, today.
Yeah.
Because there's two devastations that you came from, like kind of at the same time frame, wasn't it? Like there was this devastation about the conditions of our climate, and there was this devastation that you felt at university. And I felt both of these things, but years apart. And it feels like to me that the situation that you had that at similar times, that must have been really hard for your entire being, because this is really, okay, you're trying to build a future with what you're doing at university. And this is something you're struggling with on a very basic level of what they're teaching. And then there is this concept of our planet being in danger, and a lot of people not accepting that truth either. Did that drive you into activism? I think you once called yourself a climate punk in a way, right? Combining cypherpunk am I combining that wrong? Yeah. Can you get into that, please?
I feel like, I saw the urgency in taking action, in taking climate action, because like when I joined the climate movement, it was already like 1.5, maybe 2 years old. And the pandemic was a big cut into, big public gatherings, like the Fridays for Future. It had picked up in 2019, and then COVID basically crashed this momentum that you need when you build a social movement.
Yep.
But still, like, action was very imminent and very urgent, because time matters in a great way with these climate systems, because once we reach a certain point, we get into a new point of equilibrium that we cannot go back to. Like, this change is irreversible. And I felt this great urgency of taking action, but at the same time, I was really, really like, I was hurting, because I felt like the solutions that were presented within the climate movement were not sufficient to tackle the problem. So I went in there and tried to, come up with new ideas how to think about this problem. And I faced a lot of criticism about the energy consumption. And that was there. It was just, it still is kind of tough, but I'm more like, the longer I am on this journey, the more I get used to how to deal with it on a personal level, like not taking things or criticisms personally. In the beginning, I was, like, this is about me and I'm just communicating it wrong. But then I zoomed out a bit, and this is more about them trying to adapt to this new thing. So what really bugs me is that once you see the solution, it's so crystal clear, like it all falls together, and the path of action is so clear. But it's really hard to describe that to people who are... I feel like some people in the climate movement are more like focusing on the problems than on the solutions.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah.
It's like I'm hearing myself being played back to me, because I feel like, I don't know like exactly at what point you made this connection, because I started seriously thinking about this over 2020. And then I started writing my Hail Mary, like 10,000 word essay about Bitcoin for the climate, like early summer of 2021, and published in August or so. And everything you're saying is exactly what I was thinking and feeling and realizing, this moment of like, oh, this is a really good solution to this problem. And also that frustration that you can't convince anybody else who really needs to be convinced in the climate movement is just so sad. I mean, and also your feeling of like, once you have this clarity, the solution is so obvious, and how people in the climate movement seem to be really focused on the problem, not on the solutions. And that is exactly how I felt. It's like I hear wonderfully, eloquently summed up, explanations of what the problems are. It's very clear we know what the problems are, but I rarely hear even any of the people who are held in the highest esteem saying, here's the solutions. And whatever solutions are offered are band-aids, are small steps. Okay, we'll get electric vehicles. Okay, great. Well, we need to get off fossil fuels. Well, how are we going to do that if our entire economic system is intertwined with fossil fuels, right? Like our banking system, right? And it's just like you get to the fundamental root. You're like, oh, why don't we just take all of the money out of this failing system that is literally burning our planet, put it into a different system and build a new one? And it's like, it's hard, but it's also super easy if you could just convince everyone to get them to see the big picture and like, oh, okay, let's do it. Like small steps. Let's all work together. I feel you. I just like, that's why when I found you online, I was like, I gotta know this person. Who is this person who's standing outside the ECB doing a Fridays for Future for Satoshi? I mean, I was part of Fridays for Future before the pandemic hit, and started with a friend I met through Fridays for Future. We started our own group in Georgia called the Georgia Climate Action Network, and we were trying to get all of the local groups like the Sunrise Movement, Fridays for Future, Climate Lobby, I think, like we were trying to get them all together to do one mass demonstration at the state capitol to get the state politicians to declare a climate emergency. And that's what we were working on going into the pandemic. And exactly when the pandemic hit, that was it. I mean, we had a nonprofit, like everything just crashed. And he was, my partner was like, my partner in crime was like really anxious about the pandemic. And yeah, it was really sad that a lot of that momentum got lost and never returned. But I'm also grateful that I found this connection to Bitcoin like you did after that, because it gave me a new momentum, and it's given you such momentum. So yeah, I'm just so glad that you exist.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad you exist. Like you can feel pretty lost in the Bitcoin space as well.
Yeah,
That's true.
Absolutely. I mean, is it weird? Like, is this like your first podcast where you're talking to people who believe that climate change is real and that it's an existential crisis? Like most people in the space are like, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I've had some debates about it, but debating physics seems kind of silly. We as Bitcoiners, we trust physics to guideline our monetary system. So we shouldn't argue if physics is real if the answer isn't really comfortable.
What's there more to say, to that? It's this. I want to touch back on something. When Margot and I talked for the first time, we talked a lot about the Occupy movement that Margot was involved in and the protesting. And the first time you and I ever met in person, because we also wanted to record for the podcast, the German podcast that I had with my wife, which never happened because we gave up that podcast. But I'm glad that we're having this conversation in a podcast now. But what I remember I have to go back a little further because Margot asked me that before. And when I think of that moment that I said before, with not with the meetups, but with that meltdown that everyone once kind of has when they find out about climate change and realize, shit, this is going to affect my children and their children. It hit me really, really hard. And that was a while before the pandemic. And my wife and my reaction to that was a very altruistic approach, like telling ourselves not to eat this anymore, not to do this anymore. And it started feeling really, really painful after a while. And you started to be socially isolated in a sense. Those are thoughts that came back when you talked about your experience at the university. And then back to when we met. I have to tell you this, Margot. The first time I met Neo, the first time I met Neo in person, he hugged me and he wouldn't stop. And then he whispered into my ear that if you want to make a hug work, it has to last for 30 seconds because before that, no chemicals are reacting and it's pointless. And we stood there at some Bitcoin conference. I was like, okay, this is going on. This is going on. It's like, I think he actually has a point. And this moment, I realized what kind of a sensitive person you are. And then I'm seeing you posting pictures online, standing in front of the ECB, standing in front of whatever protests. You know, you would go into Parliament when there was whatever. We can go into all those details. The thing that I want to ask you first is, we only see that one moment, that one picture, but you're standing there for hours, exposing yourself. People walking up to you, probably not everybody with the most friendly approach, because it might be confusing or it might be scary for them, or they might even think, what is this? How does this fit into this or that occasion? How are you dealing with this?
Okay,
Tell us more
on.
about this time span when you're standing there.
But before he answers that question, I have another question for you, Neo. Why didn't I get that 30-second hug when we met in Berlin? Next time I'm in Berlin, I'm going to be asking for this 30-second hug. Okay.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Okay. Go on.
So when you draw, so let's just think about, like it's Tuesday now, we're recording on Tuesday. Both of you imagine next Saturday, you're going to draw a huge sign with your favorite Bitcoin message, go out into the city and stand in front of your local bank. Just what happens when you think of that? What are your initial reactions?
Running back home.
Terror. I'm going to stand out there by myself. Although I've done these things before, but still.
So when I thought of this back in the days, I thought, oh my gosh, everybody would look at me, everybody would talk to me. But being in the protests now for 87 weeks, my conclusion is the hardest thing about the protest is that you're being ignored almost all the time. You get some confusing looks, you get some, like some sentences spat at you, like, I don't know, some reaction. But it's very rare that people will take the time in a crowded city, surrounded by other attention-seeking shops, advertisement, whatever, their phones, to stand in front of you, take in the picture, and try to process it. And in the beginning, I was trying to explain them, what I was doing, what my intentions were. But now through a friend of mine whom I've met, a great Bitcoiner friend, he's studying art, and he told me, what you're doing is performance art. You don't need to explain it. The situation and what you put up on your sign and the music and whatever you present in that moment, it speaks for itself, and people need to figure it out by themselves.
Yeah, I agree that it's performance art. Sorry, you keep going.
No, that's how I see it now. But I grew into it, but like to come back to the beginning, like this fear of bad response. Like I rarely have bad response from people. Like I have some people who say this is bullshit or whatever, but I grew over that within the climate movement already, since I don't take it personally. This is themselves speaking about, it's their confusion speaking, or their fears, or whatever. It says more about them than it says about me in this moment. And it's becoming more and more a meditative process, actually. Like, I'm just being in the moment. And another Bitcoiner told me a great word for it, a Greek word. It's called cosmos.
Mm.
And it's actually super refreshing to be in a very sprawly area, very lively area of the city, where everybody is kind of hasty, looking for the next big sale and what to shop and what to do next, and just sitting there and taking in the picture and, slowing down. I think Bitcoin is a lot about slowing down and letting time do its work.
Mm. Yeah, that's
How
really
long would you
beautiful.
usually do your protests, like on one day, and what are the most favorite locations that you stood in front of?
So when I was at the central bank, I would sit there probably for 8 or 9 hours each day for 3 weeks.
Wow.
It started, I wanted to start it at 13:12 till 21:21. But usually on Saturdays, I just go for up to 21 blocks, like never more than 21 blocks. One block is enough.
That is incredible dedication.
It sure is.
I think when I used to do these with my friend, we'd go out to the mall and just stand in the corner with our climate signs. And we did just for a couple hours because it's tiring. How do you sustain yourself the whole time?
It's, like 21 blocks is up. If you have a 10-minute average, it's up to 3.5 hours, I guess.
Mm.
So that's not too much, especially if somebody stops by and you're having a good conversation. It can last up to 2 hours if you find this gem. But apart from that, I have good music. I'm just I'm really enjoying this in this moment. In the winter, it sometimes is really cold, but 10 minutes or one block is already enough. Like, I don't do 21 blocks each and every week, but I found this design of protest very sustainable for myself, because I would burn out, like many climate activists, they burn out within 2 years.
Correct
I'd
me
say.
if I'm wrong on this, but I have the feeling Margot said that the climate activist movement that she's been involved in kind of died out in the pandemic. I feel like here in Germany, this has actually happened way before. I remember that was when I'm teaching at school, and at first I was really annoyed with this generation. I thought like, there's no subcultures anymore, and there's no punks, and there's no hip hoppers, and they all like the same, and they just do everything subcultural online. That I realized then, okay, there is subcultures, but they don't display it with the signifiers that I was used to anymore. Okay with that, but I thought, they're really boring. And then there was Fridays for Future, and I thought like, okay, wow, they have dedication. They can organize protests with. I mean, there were millions of people on some weekends in Germany, on different cities, but millions of people. But then it died out pretty soon. And what I'm wondering about when you talk about how much you enjoy it, is the necessity for a successful protest and also rebellion and a serious change in society, is that linked to art? How important is the art of the protest to you? Because this is more than just holding up a sign. You get into character. You really, really built this art of yours.
So what I was trying to do when I thought of this was basically fix everything what I thought was wrong with Fridays for Future, what didn't make them successful. So I wanted to, like, this idea of Saturdays for Satoshi is not so much about myself, but about designing a very efficient and very robust, anti-fragile art of protesting that could be copied anywhere in the world. And in order for that to happen anywhere in the world, somebody needs to make it happen first, which I decided to do myself then because nobody else was going to do it. But, you know, like with Fridays for Future, for example, in Germany, there's after Fridays for Future in 2021, there was another group in Germany starting to do climate action and climate protest, which was The Last Generation. They're more known as gluing themselves to streets and doing civil disobedience. And there was a huge public outreach in Germany about this form of protest, like gluing themselves to streets and hindering people to go to work and all this stuff. But I believe civil disobedience was something that made Fridays for Future big in the beginning, because it was children who were obliged to go to school who said we don't want to go to school because there will be no future for us if we just let this happen. And then Fridays for Future gained a lot of power in the early days. They talked to the chancellor and they were invited to the United Nations, and they were invited to the World Economic Forum. So they got this taste of power. And then they started to, in my eyes, play a bit more by their rules. So now if we do a global climate strike, it's at 2 or 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. It has nothing to do with civil disobedience anymore because the kids go to school before. And they have distanced themselves from the actions of what the last generation did in Germany a lot. So I just tried to think of all the good stuff in all the different organizations I've been part of and piece it together in a puzzle that is, if it scales, it would be, like in my head, it would be very effective, very people efficient, and would actually, the more people would take this action, the faster we would see change into the right direction.
Yeah, I want to
from my mind.
Yeah, so I think this is a really, really important point because I think even Greta herself, who started Fridays for Future, has moved away from Fridays for Future to a large degree. I mean, she now goes around different parts of Europe and travels by train or ship to other continents and does protests. She's been in Western Sahara, for example, recently. She's gotten more involved in bringing attention to social injustices, genocides, and linking that back to climate justice, which I think is a natural, logical step for her. But I'm curious about where you've ended up in terms of reimagining this, because Extinction Rebellion was built on a blueprint as well that was provided and designed largely by Roger Hammond, who is currently serving time in jail in the UK for advising one of these like stop oil groups that I guess like hung themselves down, like this one M25 or some freeway in the UK. And they, like several of them were sentenced to like 5 years in prison. So Hammond, are you familiar with Roger Hammond's like guide on all this by any chance?
I read a book. I think it's similar to this one. So there are basically like these Bibles on how to build a social movement. The last generation in Germany was built upon one of them. I think I actually have it here. Wait a sec.
Well, while we're waiting, Patrick.
Intermission music.
I don't know if you're familiar
shall we
with.
Start singing?
Are you familiar with Roger Hammond at all, or Hellman?
No, I'm not. Absolutely not.
So he was an organic farmer in the UK who started seeing firsthand the effects of climate change on his crops. And he ended up going back to school for a PhD where he studied nonviolent resistance, nonviolent protest. And he went through all the literature and came up with a blueprint for decentralized, nonviolent activism, in which Extinction Rebellion was built on. And so he even put out a video a few years ago that was like this 6-month plan of like how you would be able to go from protest to changing the world, basically. And I think one of his main points, like you only need like 2% of the population to make change in society. And the thing that he advocated for were these small decentralized groups. Don't use a lot of people in leadership, like just do 2 or 3 people at the most as your core group. Come up with the plan, then go out and find the people that will help you execute it, and you tell them what to do, basically. And that way you reduce the conflict that happens when you have too many, basically, too many cooks in the kitchen kind of idea, like too many people, too many ideas, conflicts arise. Like you just need a tiny group. You'll get to a solution quickly. You'll figure out what to do. Have lots of people do this, because the more people in these small groups doing it, the probability that one of these people will succeed. And then you go, and a big part of this is that you must get arrested because you need to get attention. And getting arrested is a really good way to get attention, generally speaking. Although these days I'm not so sure anymore. But that was the general guideline. And then you get out of jail and you go on a tour. You go on a tour and you talk about what you did. You go to universities, you go to clubs, you go wherever you can, and you tell them about what you did. And that is it means to inspire other people to do what you did. And that was the blueprint that Extinction Rebellion followed. And it evolved into these smaller kind of like cells, I guess you could say, like Just Stop Oil, where they started actually going and taking the next step, where they were doing and their own kind of performance art, I would say, too, Neo, where like the ones that would go into the Louvre, for example, and they were throwing soup on famous paintings like the Mona Lisa, or they were also gluing themselves to streets, or they were going to gas stations and smashing the pumps so that you couldn't use them, or going and blocking jets, so rich people couldn't fly, who, they are like responsible for like huge percentage of emissions, of travel emissions, right? The ultra wealthy. So that was the idea. So I'm curious, how does your blueprint or vision for this kind of performance of protest play out in comparison to what we've already seen with this formulation that Extinction Rebellion took, and then with the formulation that Fridays for Future took? Because I think this is really important, because we are sort of stuck, I would say, and we constantly have to iterate to find new ways to get attention. And what you said earlier was so important. Is like one of the things you realized is how easy it is to be ignored when you're out there protesting, standing with your sign. Yeah. And these issues are so important. And we can't let people forget that climate change is real. The effects on our society, the effects are huge, and some of them are irreversible, and they are happening in our lifetime. but everybody continues to go through life as if everything is fine. They'll live forever. Nothing bad will ever happen. And yet we have these insane floods already in Europe. We've got these massive fires in the US and California, Canada, flooding in Africa. We've got, what's the opposite of flooding? We've got
Drought.
we have droughts. My concussion brain. I'll blame it on that. Right? We've got these horrible droughts. We've got starvation happening as a result. We've got climate migration happening already. It's all happening, and it can only get worse without action. So, I've set you up here. Great.
Yeah.
Take it away. Let's hear it. I want to know.
So we need to take action. And in order to change the system at its core, I think it's on us Bitcoiners to take action, because we actually understand the root problem of the economic system. And Bitcoin is a social movement. We are a very decentralized and non-hierarchical structure, basically. Like meetups, they aren't organized by, like, there are no leaders to meetups in Germany. Of course, there are a few people who have been there for a very long time, or some people claim to be leaders of meetups, maybe. But in a way, these are like, we call them Ortsgruppen, or like small cells, like nodes. And if we would utilize the people power of these nodes and convince them that peaceful public protest is incredibly effective at seeing change in their environment, and if we could mobilize them into taking peaceful public protest or participating in it, I think that the outcome would be far more widespread within society than because this is a bottom-up movement. If people like you and me do it, or every other Bitcoiner who is listening to this, instead of the top-down approach from nation-state adoption, strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Hi everyone, hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now.
So what I imagine, like, it's very easy to ignore one guy in an orange vest with a weird sign sitting in front of a bank, but there are multiple banks in a city. And if you walk on a Saturday through your city and you pass this one guy, you maybe recognize him, maybe not. I'm pretty unrecognizable, I guess. So not unrecognizable. I think I get recognized by most people, but most people walk by. But if they walk by and like 400 meters further down the road, they see another guy in front of a bank with an orange vest, they have this glitch in the matrix already, because they have a deja vu moment where they're like, wait, is it the same guy? Is it a different guy? What is happening here? And once they run into a third person, they see a pattern, and they're like, shit, these guys know something about banks and money, which I don't. And since money is kind of important or fundamental to what I'm doing here, I'm shopping, I need to go speak to them. So this is basically the game plan. And you don't need many people. Like in Germany, many bank locations are closing down. Like the banking system itself is getting more centralized. So in a city with 1 million inhabitants like Cologne, you probably have like 40, 50 banks. We could do that with all the people that are coming to the meetup once a month. And like, I'm already going through Cologne and I hear random people whispering, "Isn't that the Bitcoin guy?" Now imagine how many weeks it would take if in front of every bank in the city there was this one Bitcoin guy sitting. I believe it would probably take less than a month on repetition to be known in the whole city that something weird is happening here. And I believe that, the banking system itself, it's very good to protest against it because it's so fragile. Like, the whole system is built on trust, and there's a general mistrust already sweeping through society. And on the other side, since I'm doing it alone and everybody else is doing it alone, it's a decentralized protest, so nobody is organizing it, and you have a very good legal framework because you can always say, well, I'm just here sitting in the streets voicing my opinions. Can't I do that anymore? Because there's nobody around. The next person you would find is at the other bank, and it's 400 meters further. So the risk involved with getting like police grabbing you up and you getting handcuffed and taken away. This is what many people like. You need hardcore activists and protesters to do this, which is why I'm going to the last generation, because they're actually the people who are willing to take action. But in my eyes, we should try a different form of protest, like doing this action in front of the banks in a decentralized way. And with the Bitcoiners, you have the people who understand this, who will talk to anybody about Bitcoin, who wear shirts, who go to conferences, who put so much time into Bitcoin, who are themselves Bitcoin activists, but they are so wary of peaceful public protest. And if you could combine this, like if you can make the protesters understand why protesting for Bitcoin is very, very powerful, and if you could make Bitcoiners understand that going out in front of their door in their community and standing in front of a bank is way more powerful than shitposting something on X, then we would have huge momentum going forward. And especially in places like Germany, we are basically at no risk. Like, I had many police encounters. They come, they see what I'm doing, and they're going away because they can't do shit legally. They can't detain me because I'm alone. I don't need to ask for permission to do my protest because I'm alone. And I recently ran into a school friend of mine who's working at the police, and I asked him, like, what would you do? Because he was called on me by the bank, basically. And they had like 2 people come to me, talk to me for 2 minutes, and then be gone after a while. And I asked him, what would you do if in front of every bank in the city there was a person sitting? And then he would say, like, okay, police would probably be overwhelmed within a second because we have 40 different locations and we can't put all police force into single people voicing their opinion publicly. So I just feel with this combination, you have like a very sweet spot that you just need to put pressure on. And on scale, I don't see how this is stoppable. Like, then you get arrested probably at a certain point when you have this in a city, and the first wave of protesters would get arrested, but then you will be like, well, these are just people voicing their opinion publicly, and then you have this public outcry about this, and then you would have new people questioning, why do these people sitting in front of the banks so harmlessly, why do they get arrested? Why can't they do this anymore? So yeah, this is my pitch for Saturdays for Satoshi.
I like
And
it.
I think that's the beauty of it. Yeah. It's to stay in that reference that you have with the Matrix movie. It's kind of it's basically the woman in the red dress, right? That passes by Neo, catches his attention, and he's like, wait a moment. I'm gonna start to think about the system. And if this catches on, basically your protest kind of is in that curiosity stage still, right? Or is there other people that are imitating it and doing it as well? Maybe to describe it to the just listening audience, not to those watching it on YouTube. Neo is sitting in front of us in a very decent shirt with even wearing a tie behind that microphone. You're even wearing a tie. On top of that, you see an orange vest. So you see someone dressed almost like a banker wearing an orange vest standing in front of a bank. Have people imitated your idea already? Or is it still, I don't want to say just you. Is it you at this stage?
It's me on a weekly stage. Like, I have ran into people who were really engaged and were like, oh, I'm going to do that. And I had people join me in my protest in front of the central bank, as well as at conferences, at Bitcoin conferences. So we gathered a group of like 20 or 30 people, and they all stood with me in front of the bank. But I don't know if you know this video of this one guy dancing on a hill, and then it basically, it's like how to start a social movement on YouTube.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
one-
I know
yeah.
which one you mean. Yeah, it's like a party crowd on a hill, and one guy starts dancing, very silly, right? Is it
yeah.
that one?
And then
Yeah,
everybody
and-
starts joining in. Is that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the
But there's this initial phase where everybody just looks at that person, it's like, what's wrong with him?
true.
Until they realize that he's the guy who's just gonna give everybody the time of their lives in a few minutes.
But the core message of the TED Talk is that the initiator is kind of important, but the first follower is as important as the initiator, because he basically gives social acceptance to what the initiator does. And after the first follower, everybody else joins in.
Yeah, this is really
Over
interesting. Bringing
So
in a little
I'm
bit of
I'm
psychology.
still looking basically for my first follower.
Yeah.
You're Hal Finney of protesting.
Well, I think this is a really interesting observation, because it really is, when you think about sociology and psychology of humans, like we've sort of evolved to survive by fitting into the group. So having somebody signal permission that it's okay for you to join this new group, at least temporarily, is a really important step, I think. So yeah, it's just a spot on observation of the challenges of getting people to do new things that at first seem outside of the window of what's acceptable in society. I'm sad that you don't have follower number 2 joining yet, especially from people who go to protests in general, because I know you don't just stand outside banks by yourself. You also attend other protests, and you're dressed in the same way. You've got your signature hat with buttons all over it, and Bitcoin buttons, and the orange vest, as Patrick described. And you're there as well with your Bitcoin sign. at these other protests. And I'm
Yes.
kind of disappointed that the other protesters have not taken to what you're doing and asked you, like, can I do what you're doing, or this makes a lot of sense. I mean, have you experienced anything at all like that?
Well, I think to add on that, it might be a bit intimidating as well for people to join in, which I think it always is, because what we haven't talked about is what's written on your signs, because you manage to find very clever phrases that kind of, sometimes I've seen pictures of you where I think like, okay, you're pretty much upsetting or confusing or both everyone who reads this, both the people who are on the side of the protesters and also the people who are protested against. So everybody's looking at you like, what are we doing with this? So I think that kind of makes it hard to imitate it, which is meant as a compliment, of course, because I think it's clever phrases you put on there. Can you give an
These are
example
all
like that?
open source. Like, they just pop into my head, and like this is designed to be as open source as possible, so people can just copy it, put it on a sign, and stand in front of there. They don't need to speak to the people. They just view it as performance art. And
didn't you just recently have a sign where it was basically a protest that was kind of on the left-right thingy?
Yes.
And you basically had something that didn't work for either one?
Yes.
What was that one again? I don't remember it.
So last weekend I was in Dresden, and Dresden is in Eastern Germany. It's a city that is getting increasingly more polarized, because outside of Dresden there are a lot of AfD voters, which is the party supported by Elon Musk and all the other neo-fascists in the world, basically. And then we had the city center. Like most of the cities in Western Germany, it is as it is in America. Like, cities are blue, a country is red. In Germany, it's the other way around. Country is blue, city is red, greenish, I would say. So we had these two groups that were protesting in the city, and I wasn't actually aware of the protest, because I was just sitting in front of the bank on another square, like 400 meters apart from it, and a guy came up to me and was like reading my sign. There was written Pegida on it, which is like a protest movement that started a couple of years earlier in Dresden, that were protesting against migration and Islamism coming into Europe, coming into Germany, and endangering German culture. And he came up to me, and he was just basically reading the sign of Pegida and was like, you're coming over to the protest, right? And I'm like, oh, I wasn't aware of that, but I'll check it out. And then I went to this marketplace, and there were a huge group of people with like peace flags and Germany flags and Saxony flags. And I was like, okay, these are the more right-wing people. And then I went through them, and on the other side, I saw some people divided by police who had like "fuck AFD" and rainbow flags and all this stuff, and these were the left wingers. And yeah, I just stood in between, because I couldn't I feel like it's not the people themselves. Like, I was listening to what the people on stage at the right wingers group were saying, and they were claiming something like a constitution based on private property, on freedom, and on privacy. And I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. Like, I would support that. But then they were talking about the woke mind virus, and I was like, okay, bro, now you're bullshitting. And on the other side, They were saying some very sane stuff about human interaction, about how we should let just people live their lives, love who they want, give women the ability to decide over what they want to do with their bodies. Like sane stuff in this direction, but there are some insane takes on economics on the left part. And I was just standing in between and just trying to make people, to build a bridge, because I feel like people need to talk more.
Mm.
And then I was approached by two people from the more right-wing group. And one guy actually had a big Bitcoin logo on his belly. And he was like, so on my protest sign, there was written, fascism is no alternative, Bitcoin is. And he was like, well, I kind of like your sign, but I think you should show it to the other people, because they're actually the fascists, because they wanted to, like, the woke mind virus fascists, whatever. And but we had a good conversation. Like this one guy, he wanted to push me out of it a little bit more, like use more physical force. But the other guy was like, no, Bitcoin is really cool. And this guy, you can talk to him. So it was just amazing. And then I was asking him, like, shouldn't we just talk more to each other instead of being in these ideologies hung up in there? And he was like, yeah, talking is very important. And I personally feel that I can talk to all the people here on this demonstration, but to none of the people on the other side.
Wow.
And yeah, it's tough. But like in my mind, it was like, imagine all of these people would just realize that they're basically, like, they're all kind of anarchists in their hearts. They just don't know it yet. But like they all get fucked by the same system.
Yeah.
And they're just angry at different people and trying to vote other people into positions of power who will lie to them and who won't make their lives better in the end. So just going there and just, I'm not so much about talking anymore, just being there and just trying to radiate this orange anarchist vibe of everything will be fine if we can just get together and fight for the same thing.
Yeah, I love this analysis. And I want to add to this because I had a similar observation when I was covering the Occupy movement. But before I get into that, I wanted to read some of your signs, some of the wording on your signs, because Patrick was so kind to collect all of them, or many of them, and share them with me. And some of them are in German, so I'm going to try to ask what they mean. Hopefully you can understand me. But here's some that are in English. System change, not climate change. That's a very standard climate movement protest sign. Yeah, WTF happened in 1971. What does this mean? Penga strike for climatet. Penga strike? Something strike for climate?
So the original strike, the original sign from Greta Thunberg read Skull Strike for Climatet.
Yeah.
So this sign is Swedish, and Penga strike basically means money strike. So
nice.
I'm not striking school, but I'm striking the monetary system.
I love that.
There's some in there, Margot, the German ones that I can't even read because they're written in Cologne dialect.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, how about
only Neo can read them.
Here's print books, not money. Mein Bank ist da wo ich bin. Well, I totally butchered that. But what does that mean? My bank is
where I am.
Is where I am. Honey Badger don't care. I like that. Burn trust, not coal. I think that's a really nice mix of the two. There is a plan B. Oh, here's one. Wake up, Neo. Fiat capitalism has you. Follow the wise rabbit. Bitcoin is climate action. Inflation is rising, and so are we. Climate
This is
punks
actually a
rise
good
up.
one.
Yeah? Tell
The
us.
inflation is rising, and so are we. Is a remix from the oceans are rising, and so are we.
I love that. I love how you've combined the two. It's just it just makes you very, very happy. How about, let's see, Money for Future? Okay, that's an obvious play on Fridays for Future.
ACAB, all central banks are broke. That's a nice
I
one
love
too.
that. Freedom lies in being bold. The halving is near. Bitcoin.
Yeah, I was literally doing the Homer Simpson meme, going into the city with like the halving is near in front of me and something written on the back, like I think the halving schedule, like
That's so
3.125, and I
Nice.
was ringing a bell, like going through the streets, like yeah.
Bitcoin Independence Day. Paper money inevitably returns to its intrinsic value, zero. Trust math, not myths. Wait to buy Bitcoin, and then it's crossed out. It's crossed out. Buy Bitcoin and wait. No banks, no problem. Are you looking for a sign to buy Bitcoin? That's cute. There's so many here. What about you, Patrick? Is there any in this list that you really liked, especially ones that I can't pronounce because they're in a language that I don't speak? Do you have some in Esperanto too?
Yes.
I saw one.
I have Bitcoin sen permesa mono and Esperanto internacia lingvo. So sen permesa mono means permissionless money in Esperanto.
Nice.
And internacia lingvo means international language.
Nice.
I believe these ideas are a match made in heaven.
Patrick, do
you
you
mean
have
Esperanto and Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think Bitcoiners who are interested in learning a new language should not learn Spanish to go to El Salvador, but rather learn Esperanto to establish this. Esperanto is born out of this same core principles of Bitcoin, basically. It's a decentralized permissionless language protocol that you can access very easily because it was designed to be as logic and as easy to learn for all the people on the globe. And like it has huge culture. It's the most well-spoken language, basically, or like art language in the world. There are communities in China. There are communities everywhere over the world, and they're very well organized. So I just stumbled across this idea on my Bitcoin journey, and I was like, whoa, if now all Esperantists use Bitcoin and it all intertwines, and it, in my head, it formed this vision of a very united global society that is able to communicate in one language, because Esperanto was basically designed to foster world peace, because so Esperanto was designed by Dr. Esperanto, which is a pseudonym. We know who is behind the pseudonym, but like the original book, like the Esperanto white paper, was released under a pseudonym. And it was released to foster global peace by making people able to communicate with each other, because when we can communicate our problems with our fellow other humans, we can find solutions to these problems. And language itself is very tied to a national idea. And language has been like, we're only speaking English right now because a couple hundred years ago, some people like conquered the whole world and were forcing people with violence to learn their language,
Right.
or under the threat of violence to learn their language, so that now this is basically adopted all over the globe. But with Esperanto, many people say that Esperanto kind of failed because we're currently not speaking Esperanto. But I feel like this is very similar to Bitcoin because people adopt it out of idealistic reasons and they can adopt it voluntarily. And I feel like this chapter of this language is not at all finished. There are great times ahead, and I feel more people, the more cosmopolitan and international we think, and the more the nation states becomes kind of an illusion in our mind, we get to this international level of communication with Esperanto, I feel.
I love this. I didn't know the history behind Esperanto. And as you were talking about it, clicked for me what this connection that you had made about it. It's a language you can voluntarily opt in. It's not forced onto you through conquest, through violence. It's a peaceful protest against that kind of hegemony through language and culture. And I think that's actually a really wonderful blend of the two. And now I'm going to think seriously about this a bit, because when we're thinking about this society, this system B that we're trying to build on Bitcoin, and yes, idealistically, we're trying to do this. And a lot of people, even who go to Bitcoin conferences, don't see this future that we see, right? They're really in it for number go up. But when we're thinking about what is that future we want, language is really important, I think. And that's something that we have to think about alongside how functional the society will be in terms of how we'll live together, how we will grow food, right? How we will build cities, but also how we communicate is really a really important piece. How we communicate culture, and how do we do it in a non-violent, non-hierarchical, opt-in, voluntary kind of way. And yeah, you've given me a lot to think about on that. I had not really thought about Esperanto in a really long time, and I totally see where you're going with this, and I love it.
And it's a super powerful reference. And now that you brought Esperanto up, because I study a bit of linguistics as well, and the one thing that I didn't get into Esperanto a lot, because I stopped at the conclusion that it failed. Because if we go back to when it originated, I think it was the late 19th century when Esperanto
1878 or something.
Okay. And to me, it was like, the reference to put it to Bitcoin, like, when is the point when we say Bitcoin failed,
Yeah.
What kind of adoption do we expect? What time frame do we see? If you talk to the number go up people, it's just another few weeks until hyper-Bitcoinization and all that crap. I'm sure people said the same thing about Esperanto at some point. And the thing, and that blends so well with what you just said, Margot, because what I got really interested in then was linguistics can be really, really weird when it goes into pragmatics. I don't know if it's translated like that as well, but like finding the blocks of some possible generative grammar that works for everyone. If anybody wonders what that noise was, that was the Bitcoin white paper just falling down on Neo at this moment behind it.
It's saved. He saved
this
it, though.
does not mean that it failed right now.
No, this was not a sign from God. It was just an accident.
Definitely not. Now let me try to get back to phrase this into a question. So, Bitcoin failing, Esperanto failing. I thought Esperanto failed because it did not get successful enough in a certain time frame, and my conclusion was it didn't involve enough culture. As you said before, most languages work because they're glued to some sort of nation, or if we look at dialects or accents, there's traditions involved in it, and dances and songs and all these kind of things that make these languages work and make them persist. And Bitcoin is in a stage of building culture, but we see that people get into Bitcoin because they want to opt out of a system and want to free themselves of it. And the more you spend time looking into this Bitcoin community, you see that people just cling onto new tribalism within this Bitcoin community, and this is something where I'm really curious. Can this actually work to find something? Because I think in many ways you can make an argument that Bitcoin is also a language, because we communicate value in this system and decide who transmits value in this system. And to me, it makes sense that Bitcoin is this system where it could, and I think it should work, that we find this generative grammatical approach in this language. Do you think Bitcoin has an advantage to Esperanto in some way, that Esperanto kind of didn't fix this one problem, like grammar or whatever it could be?
I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly. I mean, I agree that Bitcoin
I'm not sure
is
if it was really a question. It's just some rambling about thoughts about, like, let me rephrase it. Could there be something missing in Esperanto that Bitcoin has thought of, that it really works for everyone, and maybe it even doesn't need these cultural movements clinging to it? Because right now we all think, okay, Bitcoin needs culture, or Bitcoin needs nation state adoption, or needs this to work, but maybe it just needs to be good enough to work. So my question is, maybe is Esperanto good enough, and can it still work? Or is it just too hard to tell?
It still works. Like, I wouldn't, like, it was designed to be an international language. And though we are not having this conversation and recording this podcast in Esperanto, doesn't mean that the language has failed, because there are plenty of Esperanto podcasts out there. There are people out there who live this idea, who vibrate this idea into their communities. And I feel with Esperanto, it is hard because it is truly decentralized in a way. And it's hard to build culture decentrally, because people in the Esperanto community, they can get together maybe, let's say, 5 or 6 times a year at different festivals and congresses. But apart from that, they are mostly in communities where they don't use their language. And language, it's really easy to learn a language when you can use it all the time. So I just believe that in my utopia vision, we have these Bitcoin circle economies that also decide to build in this international language protocol to communicate within the group, but also with each other. And, like Esperanto, like I've been down the rabbit hole for a bit, but like I have so much more research to do about the immense culture in Esperanto community, about all the organizations. There's so much. There are huge libraries, and it feels kind of daunting in the beginning, because when you're starting to learn a language and there are these big books, like 1,000-page books on everything, it's you're really trying to you're self-conscious because maybe you're not good enough to understand it, although reading and understanding is very comparatively easy. But then it takes a lot of time and a lot of brain processing power to read in a different language as well. But I think I would like there's a one Esperanto city actually in Germany that I will invite every Bitcoiner to check out one day. Maybe we'll do a Bitcoin Esperanto Congress there one day in Esperanto Urbo in Herzberg am Harz. So it's a city in Germany where there has been one very enthusiastic Esperanto enthusiast, and she made it possible that all the signs in the city are bilingual.
Wow.
And yeah,
That's very cool.
I think
That's, that's like you. One takes one person. There's just one person.
Yes.
There's one Neo. Just need that follower.
Exactly. And I think that's the beauty of the point you just made. And I think we can reference that to Bitcoin, because the point of Bitcoin not failing is not if it's not used by everybody in the world. The point of Bitcoin not failing is Bitcoin existing.
Exactly.
And that's the same with Esperanto.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
That's the fundamental point. You can think about, if you think hyper Bitcoinization means everybody in the world is using Bitcoin, that's probably never going to happen. But if you think of Bitcoin success in terms of it always being there when people need it, or within communities that need it, that want to use it, then it has a very high chance of succeeding. Just like Esperanto, so long as there's a community that needs it, it will have been a success. So I think tying these two together, is so cool, and one of the newest ideas I've heard in a long time in Bitcoin. And I love it so much when we're thinking about the future and changing society. I love that you stumbled upon this discovery, this connection. It's so cool. And now we have to wrap up, though.
It's about building culture.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about building Bitcoin culture. Like we were talking about number go up, right? And all this stuff. But I think we Bitcoiners, if we truly want to see a hyper Bitcoinized world, we should just embrace more that we are actually living in a hyper Bitcoinized world already, because we're hyper Bitcoinized individuals. And then you just need to think, how would hyper Bitcoinized individuals act? Like, what language would they speak? What messengers would they use? What tools? I don't know. Like,
Oh my
how would
gosh.
their gardens look like?
I have this idea. I don't know if we can do this, Patrick. Can we put subtitles in Esperanto for the show?
If we find
we can
someone
get
to
AI
translate
to do it. No, we just need AI. Just give me the
Yeah, we'll
transcript.
look
I'll
for
put it into
something.
ChatGPT. I'm sure ChatGPT can give us Esperanto subtitles.
Let's give that a shot.
Okay, we're going to try
We can't
it.
promise it yet, but if you're reading it right now, you're reading it.
Then we
obviously.
succeeded. See?
Neo, the catching on of your protest, everyone inspired right now. If we have all those fancy suit wearing bankers that regularly listen to this show now decide they want to take off their jacket, put on an orange vest, and step in front of their employer's house and put up a sign, how can they let you know that they have become the second dancer?
They just post under hashtag Saturdays for Satoshi.
There you go, everyone.
Saturdays
do
for
this on Saturday.
Yes. Well, now we really do have to wrap up because we've been at this for almost an hour and a half and my back is starting to hurt. Sitting at a weird angle. Thank you so much, Neo. It's so wonderful to have you on the show. You've brought such a different perspective than what normally is heard on these podcasts. And I'm so grateful that you're doing this work, but also that you continue to do this work, that you haven't stopped. And you seem so motivated to keep going. And I love it. I love it so much. Thank you. I can't wait to have you on again, where next time we're speaking in Esperanto together.
Yes. Ni devas fari ĝin.
What does that mean?
We
Probably
have to do
something
this.
nice.
We have to do this.
Nice.
Ni devas fari ĝin.
Ni devas fari ĝin. Nice.
Yes.
Well,
It sounds nice.
it is a
And
pretty
thank
language.
thank you for having me and for having this wonderful podcast and this bubble in the Bitcoin space that I feel so sensitive and huggly and warm and welcome in.
Yes.
So thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this work.
Thank you so much. I can't wait till the next time all of us hang out together again in Berlin. That was so much fun last summer. So thank you, Patrick. Thank you, as always, to our producer. And once again, to all of our listeners, you've been tuning in to The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Margot Paez. And as always, please follow us wherever you're listening to this. Hit the subscribe button, the follow button, hit the like button, because especially on YouTube, because that gets us more views, and subscribe on YouTube because we're trying to build up that channel. And yeah, did I forget anything, Patrick?
There's this moment that you usually reference to at the end of the episode.
Oh yes. Well, that will be up next, called the Bitcoin Moment of Zen. And I guess I'll just do it now. Let's just cut to it. Let's just do it. All right, everybody. Thank you for a wonderful show. Thank you for tuning in with us. We'll see you next week. And now for your Bitcoin Moment of Zen.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be a citizen. That is not my business. I don't seek to be governed or controlled by anyone. I should like to liberate everyone if possible. Sick, healthy, privileged or oppressed. We all want to free one another. Human beings are like that. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and sustainable, but we have lost the way. These are not mere documents. They are the chains of privilege, an accident of birth that grants some the freedom to roam and others the sentence of confinement. This act is not a denial of identity, but a rejection of a world carved into segments by invisible lines. A world where one's place of birth dictates one's heroism. We blend these symbols of division not in negation of order, but in affirmation of a more profound unity, one that recognizes the intrinsic value of every human soul, unmarked and unmarked by geography. We seek not chaos, but harmony. A harmony that comes not from the suppression of diversity, but from its celebration. A world without borders, where freedom is not a privilege, but a birthright shared by all. Let this act not be seen as a destruction, but as a creation. a call to reimagine our world, a world where we are not defined by the documents we hold, but by the humanity we share. In that spirit, let us unite, not under the banners of nation, but under the sky of our collective human spirit.